Welcome to week 8. We will be covering chapter 8, development across the lifespan, during this week. As usual, I've given you the to-do list here. A couple of things that I want to cover before I dive into the objectives for the chapter, and that would be doing the tweets. We're using Twitter for this class, and some of you have been really great about doing that. There's just a few people I've noticed who have not done that, who haven't even been on Twitter or maybe went on once and replied. I just want to say that if you are missing these tweets and not doing them each week, it will hurt you. The tweets are worth 8% of your grade, roughly 39 points over the course of the semester. So 8% is the difference between could be a C, even a C plus, and a D plus, because 8% can drop your grade down. If you have a 0 for the tweets and you're perfect in everything else, that could be the difference between an A and a B. So I want to just reiterate the importance of doing these. If you haven't been, I would get on board and start doing them now. You've missed a few weeks, but better to get some points rather than none. They're really relatively easy. If you've noticed, those of you who have been doing the tweets, they're usually kind of personal questions, opinion questions, things that you can answer very easily just from your own experience. And the idea behind why we do the tweets, again, is so that it just introduces you to the topic. So for example, this week we're talking about development across the lifespan. And so the tweet that I've posted for the week has to do with you thinking back to your teenage years. What were you like versus what are you like now? What do you remember the most? We just covered memory. What are some of your strengths? Things like that. They're really just meant to be thought-provoking questions that kind of get you into the material. And the idea also is that you're doing the tweets at the very beginning of the week, which is why they're due each week early in the week, Tuesdays, because I want you doing that before you've really dove into the material, because then you're going to really get to the crux of development and what the different theorists have said about development. What has research shown? What do we know about the stages that occur in early childhood and adolescence and later adulthood and so forth? So I hope that, those of you who haven't been doing them will get on board for the mere sake that it's 8% of your grade. So let's dive into the objectives for the week. As you'll notice, we pretty much, development is covered in stages. A lot of what we understand about development happens at different phases or stages in life. So that's sort of the angle that's taken. We're going to start out with talking about some different heredity factors and how the research looks at development. If we're going to go ahead and study childhood development or track people from early childhood development into later adult development, how would we do that? What would that look like? And we touched on some of this back in chapter 1 when we were covering research methods, and now we're going to dive into it a little bit more. You're going to learn more about longitudinal designs as well as some correlational studies, cohort studies, twin studies. These are the different types of terminology that you're going to hear a lot about as we're going through this sub-area or sub-discipline of psychology called development. Now, these theories that we're going to be learning about come from developmental psychologists. So as you're noticing, each chapter is a different topic. Well, those topics directly relate to various areas of psychology. And I know I've said this before, but each one is in and of its own discipline within psychology. So this is really a very wide area under the umbrella of psychology. So we're going to start with talking about the different research methodology in the area of developmental psych. we'll take a look at the key roles of heredity and then environment in what determines development. So this is the age-old nature versus nurture question. It used to be what matters most, where you come from, the nature end, or heredity, genes, DNA, or how you grow up, how you're raised. And now we kind of know that it's not an either or. We know that both matter, just in different ways. And so that's what the beginning kind of third of the book, of the chapter, talks about. So you'll learn about the different phases, even pre-birth, so the embryonic phases, germinal, fetal periods of pregnancy. Definitely spend some time looking at prenatal development, just what happens in the womb as a child is developing, what could go wrong, what are some hazards that would be to the mother during that early neonatal development. Then it's going to skip right into the kind of the second third of the book, which looks at the changes in childhood and in infancy. And here, one of the kind of big key theorists that you're going to be introduced to is Piaget, who covers the span of cognitive development. So he's looking at how does the human brain develop from infancy on. And he spends most of his time in early childhood development. That is when our brain is the most plastic, I guess you could say. Plasticity of the human brain is so great during the early stages of childhood, meaning that's when we are malleable. That's when our brains are imprinted and shaped upon. And here's where experience and the environment can really play a key role, as well as understanding and diagnosing early cognitive difficulties in children and being able to attack those with the appropriate therapeutic approach, as to help a child who might have some motor skill deficits or cognitive deficits early on to develop in the most beneficial way possible. It'll also dive a little bit into language development. How do we produce speech and sounds and the understanding of language. Vygotsky is another really big name, key player in the area of cognitive development, basically building off of Piaget's theories, looking at once our brain has sort of been set with certain cognitive development milestones, how might modeling and mentoring help our learning. And this is much of what you see in the school system today, the role of a teacher or a tutor in helping a child or assisting a child to learn, but the child's really learning on their own with guidance. So we'll spend a good deal of time there. Then it's going to jump into Erikson, who is also a stage theorist, and Erikson actually covers the entire lifespan. But he, unlike Piaget, looks at psychosocial stages of development. So where Piaget is very focused on what can the brain do, what is it capable of understanding at various ages, Erikson is interested in how do we develop in our relationship with others, our parents, our peers, the environment around us. How does that all develop over the course of our lifespan well into old age? What are the milestones of each age range? What are the big things that people would be doing at the various age ranges psychosocially? So it spends a good deal of time on Erikson there in understanding that. So you've got cognitive development and you've got psychosocial development. Then it jumps into moral development. That is the work of Kohlberg. And here's where you want to pay attention to this, and you want to use some of this, of what you're reading in the main chapter. That's going to tap right into here, the reading in the Hawk book this week, which covers morality. It covers Kohlberg's original research looking at morality. How does one determine what is moral? Why doesn't everyone not agree on what is moral? And some things we do agree on. Where does that come from? Kohlberg basically set up stages of moral development to try to understand and ascertain people's level of morality and how that develops over time, what influences it, and why are we not all at the same place at the end of that developmental period? Why are there still differences in how adults reason and rationalize their morality? Okay, so that's very much a part of the Hawk discussion that you're going to be getting in. So you'll want to know the stages and the levels within each stage. The levels and then the stages within each level that occur according to Kohlberg. Okay, and then once you've made it through that part, the very last part looks a little bit more in depth at Erikson, specifically physical, cognitive, and personality changes that occur at the various stages in life, particularly adolescence, adulthood, late aging, and then ending with death and dying. So you'll look a little bit at some of the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on death and dying and what that looks like. So it's a lot. Typically, if you were to dive deeper into psychology, if you're a psych major, you would not take development across the lifespan. That wouldn't even really be a class for you because it is such a condensed version of everything. It's usually only offered to nursing majors. So you'll see it in the catalog of classes, but it's not open to psych students, mainly because if you're a psych major, you would instead take a semester of childhood development and then a semester of adolescent development, and then you might take a semester of adult development and aging. So it's really those three which encompass this. So it's squeezing all of it into one kind of broad category. Okay, so it's a lot. It is a lot to get through for one chapter. So it's not going to dive super deep into any one area. Rather introduce you to the main ideas and the main rubric and kind of guideposts for understanding development. Okay. The videos that you're going to be watching this week are in episode 9 of Lifespan Development. Here are your lecture slides, and then I mentioned what to expect with the discussion posts. Again, I can't stress enough the importance of integrating in the main chapter, chapter 8, as well as the Hawk reading into what your answers are for this discussion. That's pretty much it, aside from a quiz. So we have that quiz closing on Friday, and that wraps up the week. Please let me know if you have questions, if anything arises and you need some help. Otherwise, have a great week, everybody.